today's class. So today we're going to be working on hopefully maybe putting the finishing touches on our throwing gauge. So here's what we got with our throwing gauge last week. We got our base, we got a couple of arms here in our gauge, and we got our little point here. Our goal for this time is to get all the joints installed. So let me go ahead and open up my throwing gauge, and you guys can do so as well if you're drawing along with us. So here is throwing gauge where we left it, and we can kind of go ahead and jump right in. So we're going to work on joints, and then we're also going to work on I'll show you how I go about creating the drawings and exporting things for the laser cutter. So creating a Dxf file that is really easy to just import into CorelDRAW and cut out on the laser cutter at the Makerspace. So you know, I get a procedure for that, and I'll walk you through it. Alright, so we've got our throwing gauge here, and something that you may remember from last time is in order to create joints, we need to have components. And as we drew this, we don't really have any components other than the components that we imported from McMaster-Carr. So we've got this wingnut up here, and a bolt that goes through it, a carriage bolt here. And
can you fix the screen? I see everybody else too here.
Oh, you don't see me?
I see your screen, but I see everybody else too.
Oh, that may just be, you may need to hit a pin button. So if you hover over the Google Meet browser window and you hover over my screen, there's a little icon of a pin, like a push pin.
Okay.
And if you click that, it'll go full screen for you. Cool?
I don't know, I screwed something up.
Good to go? I'm gonna keep going.
Yeah, keep going.
Okay, cool. Alright, so we need to have components where we have bodies. And you may remember we can turn all of our bodies into components. So right now, this is where it's really key to have names for all of your bodies. So I'll give you guys a couple of minutes. Name your bodies if they're not named already. So I've got my upright named vertical. You can call it whatever makes sense in your head. I've got my one at the top here that goes across called horizontal. And then I've got a body called base down at the bottom, and a body called point all the way up at the top. Once we convert these into components, they will keep these names. So if you want to be able to know which component we're grabbing, it'll be really important to have them named. So if you haven't named your bodies, go ahead and do that now. And I'll just give you a minute here. So again, I've got a base, I've got one called vertical, I've got one called horizontal, and I've got one called point, which is this little guy all the way out here in the end. And we're going to convert all those into components. And I'm going to do so by clicking on the Create menu and then choosing New Component. So we could have made new components right from the start. Sometimes that's really handy, but this option here in the New Component window will let us, instead of making a brand new component here where it gives me like, hey, I can name this component, there is a little checkbox here with the label from bodies. And if I click that little checkbox, now our name goes away, right? We can't name these components because they're already named. And all I have to do is either click on the bodies out here in my drawing view, or kind of my preferred method is I click on the bodies in my browser over on the left hand side there. I'll go ahead and click on all 4 of these bodies here, so the vertical, the horizontal, the base, and the point. And as I click on those, you'll see the number of bodies that are selected increases here. And once I've got all of my bodies selected, I can say OK. And now it doesn't really do anything. I mean, it does something, it just doesn't show you much. So all of my bodies folder has disappeared from my browser. I no longer have a bodies folder. I have instead a whole bunch more components down here. So here's my vertical component, my horizontal component, my base, and in each one of these components is a bodies folder with the body inside of it. So you may remember from working with components in the past, the little radio buttons next to the components are really important. So right now our main document is the active component here. It's got this little radio button active, saying that if we create a sketch, it's going to happen, it's going to create that sketch in this component. If we extrude something from a sketch, it'll make a bodies folder in this component and make that body in that bodies folder in this component. If we wanted to make a sketch or a body in a different component, we'd have to highlight the little radio button, and then you can see visually here, now that my vertical component is highlighted, everything else just kind of gets ghosted out except for that one vertical component there. Alright, so now we've got components. I'm going to go ahead and make my main document component my active component again. So the component all the way up at the top, I'll make that active. And now we can start creating some joints. So in general, I choose to make as-built joints. So you might remember from last time we kind of experimented with joints that an as-built joint is a joint that's already built from things that are in place with each other. So our arms, this arm is in place with the body that it's going to rotate around, and it's kind of in place with this other arm that it's going to rotate around as well. And the other way to build a joint is just a regular joint here, and that's for components that aren't already aligned in the way they need to in order to rotate or slide or do whatever they got to do. So it just makes sense for me to make as-built joints, and you draw them in place. But if you ever need to assemble a joint with things that are not in the right place, you can use this joint option. But we're going to go ahead and choose as-built joint here. Now there are a lot of different kinds of joints here. So in our joint window, if we change our joint type, if we click on the little drop-down menu that allows us to change our joint type, we can change this to any number of different things. So for example, the first joint we're going to make is going to be a revolute joint. So that's a joint that rotates. So if we choose that revolute joint option, now we can pick the 2 components that are going to be revolute on each other. And I'd encourage you to use that rule of thumb that I bring up quite often, I hope, is that the first item you click on is going to be the thing that moves, and the second item is going to be the thing that moves around, that does not move. So is going to be the stationary object. So we've got 2, and I can show you how this works in practice. So we're going to click on this vertical arm here. I can either click on the vertical component over here in my browser, or I can click on this arm, and I'll kind of zoom in here. So this arm is my vertical arm. That's going to be the first component that I select. And then the second component I select is going to be our base here. So if I click on that base, now our as-built joint window changes and we get that one more option, which is a snapping point. So this snapping point is basically the cylinder or axis that it's going to revolve around. So I'm going to highlight over or hover over this this little cylinder down here, and when that highlights, I'll click on it, and then in theory your joint moves around. If you missed it or you want to see it again, you can always hit this play button here. So that's how we see our joint spinning around in circles. I'm going to go ahead and uncheck these things. You can leave yours checked just to show you that if I click on the base first and I click on the arm second, then our base is moving around in circles there. And well, that's the same principle. Visually, it's not really helpful. So we'll click on our arm first and our base second, and then I'll specify that little cylinder there, and that moves around just nice. So I'm going to go ahead and click on OK. So now that we have a joint made, you may have guessed we have a joints folder now. In this joints folder, it'll be in the component of our main document. We'll have this joints folder here because the component that we had active was our main component here. So if we would have had one of these other components active, it would have made a joints folder inside of that component. I don't know if that matters, but it's certainly, for organizational standpoint, it's nice to have them out here. And again, these things are all renameable. So that first joint, I guess, is going to be called our base rotate. Yeah, anything is better than joint 1. I suppose just base just makes fine too. But so that's our base rotate here. And if you look even closer, we can see there's another little triangle next to that base rotate, and we can see that it's got a little angle drop down on it. And if I hover over that angle, I can see that I can hover over and see something called Edit Joint Limits. So right now, if I double click on this little flag, I can move this around, right? But I can also move it way down past where it could physically go to. So obviously it wouldn't be able to rotate way down here. And we can constrain the limits to which this joint moves to if we hover over that angle and click on where it says joint limits. I also think you can, there's just a little right next to it, you can click on this little edit joints limits. I think you can also right click. Yeah, you can also right click on the joint and say edit joint limits. So there's lots of ways to get this edit joint limit going on here. And if we choose this to right click and say edit joint limits, we get our little joint limit pop-up menu here. And now we can set both a minimum and a maximum rotation point. So my minimum point I can drag back to be like here-ish, and my maximum point I can drag to be over here. Now I suppose I could get super precise with this, and I can zoom in, and instead of using my mouse, I could start using the power of numbers. So I could go, looks like I could get to 93.5 before we start hitting my edge here. And on the other side, let's go ahead and make that nice and precise too. It looks like I can get to probably the exact same number because it's a circle. So 93.5, and that kind of hits right on the edge there. So this may be different for you depending on how far up your little joint hole is there, but now you can add joints, and if I animate it now, Now it goes back and forth between its joint limits. And I'll just go ahead and say OK. And now if I push and pull that joint manually, again just by double clicking on that flag, now even though I'm trying to make it go past the edge, it just will not. So it we've made it respect physics. Respect the laws of thermodynamics in this class. Alright. You may also notice you can enter in a specific dimension measurement to rotate this joint to, so I can change that to 10 degrees if I want to. Alright, so now let's do that again. Let's add another joint. Let's add a joint here at the very end. Let's go ahead and do that. So that's going to be the exact same kind of joint. It's going to be a revolute joint. It's going to rotate around on this little, on a bolt that is yet to be forthcoming. And we'll do it the exact same way. So I've got my main document component, my active component, and in the assemble menu I can just choose as built joint here. Now the point is what I want to be moving around relative to this arm, so I'm going to choose the point first, and then I'm going to pick this horizontal arm second. And now as the point that it's going to snap around, you can see there's lots of options here. I'm going to zoom in. So I could choose this circle here would rotate around the right point. This circle here, I could choose any one of these little cylinders in here. In fact, I am going to choose this little cylinder, but all of them will get me to the same place here. Alright, cool. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK. So now we've got another one of those little flags here, and I can move this flag around, and if I hit enter it stays in that position. And we've got another joint to name over in our joints folder. So this joint I'm going to call my point. Alright, so now we've got another joint that we can make here. So down over on this side, and you know, I was really struggling with this last week, and I probably should have spent some more time on it, so we may mess around with it a little bit this week here, but we've got a joint that needs to function two ways. So this arm needs to move up and down on this slot here, and it also needs to rotate around on the slot. So I'm going to make a joint between, actually tell you what, let's do an experiment. So I'm going to go up here and say assemble and then as built joint here. A joint that I've not used and that seems like it would be almost perfect is a pin slot joint. So that's pretty much exactly what we have here. It's a pin that moves around in a slot, and I wonder if we can make use of that here. So I'm going to choose this as built joint, and then in the joint type I'm going to change it from revolute to pin slot. Now the object that I want to do the moving, the component that I want to do the moving, I'm actually going to choose this bolt here. So this stainless steel bolt that we put up here, either by clicking on it here or in my drawing view, the bolt is going to do the moving. And now the arm is going to be the stationary part of that joint. And now I have to pick a snap. So I'm going to hover over this bolt, and if I get like a little, looks like I get a flag that pops up as close to the center of that as I possibly can. So it gives me a little animation, and that seems like that's kind of what I'm going for here. Only it's moving in the wrong direction. So we just need to change our slide axis. So our slide axis here, I'm going to change that from X to Y. There we go. So now it's sliding up and down on the y-axis. And if I hit animate, that's doing the right thing. And I'm going to say OK. So now, well, look at that. It will let me do either or. So I thought with the pin slat joint, it would either let me move and rotate it at the same time. But it lets me do them separately, which is great. Yeah, did you have a question?
Yeah, sorry, this makes us back up a little bit.
Not at all.
But since we're using that bolt, I had trouble getting the bolt to be in the right spot.
Gotcha. Alright, cool. So, if you missed out on the bolt, that'll give us an excuse to add another bolt, because we're going to need another one anyway. So I'm going to go ahead and grab one for my base down here. So the way that we get a bolt is in the insert menu here. If we choose insert and then insert a McMaster car component. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my McMaster car component. Now you may have yours already, Harold, but just hang out while I go find one here. So I'm going to go ahead and I've got my McMaster car window open here. I'm looking for screws and bolts. The website is great. I'm a big fan of this website, so because it's really easy to drill down and say, hey, I'm looking for a 1/4-20, and for this particular, for my instance where I'm putting it down here, just a hex head screw is kind of what I'm going for. So I'm going to grab that hex head screw, and then I can, or bolt, sorry, I can find a nice, because this is going to be around water, so we're going to want to have a nice 818 stainless steel hex head screw. I'm going to make it fully threaded because that's fun for me, and a length of 1 1/4 I believe is what we want here. So I'm going to grab my 1 1/4 length. If you need to make this window bigger, you can always expand this window too here. So I just need to change my download format from SolidWorks to Dxf File. And once I've got my bolt selected, I can hit product details. So this is always something you can go look at too if they don't have a 3D file for it. There's very little on McMaster-Carr that doesn't have a 3D file, but if it doesn't have a 3D file, a lot of times it's got a drawing. Yeah, here. I can click on that. How come it's not showing me the drawing? Oh, here we go. It's got a drawing, so in this drawing we'll have measurements on it, so you can pull these measurements if you need to make your own model. But in our case, we can just download it. So I'm going to grab 3D Dxf File, download, and now I get my little move thing here, and I'm just going to purposefully put it in the wrong spot. So somewhere over there, I'm going to say OK. Man, my computer's getting kind of warm, getting toasty. I'm going to make a little adjustment here. A little more airflow. Alright. So, now, this is the part that we're trying to get to, Harold. So, the way to align it the most accurately is to use the Align tool. So in the Modify menu, I can scroll down here to Align, and what I'd like to do is to take, so the thing I want to do the moving, I'm going to click on first. So I'm going to try using this this face here on the inside of the bolt as one of the faces that I'm choosing, and then as the to position, so you can see that was the from position, as the to position I'm going to choose this circle over here on this side, And that kind of worked, but not really. So let's try something else. It moved it, but it didn't really move it to exactly where I wanted it to move. So instead of choosing that inside face, I'm going to choose the end of the bolt. The end of the bolt has got a nice circle on it, and it gives me like that little widget that tells me that that's the point that I'm aligning. And now instead of that opposite side, I'm going to choose this side here. Kinda. So that kinda got it in place. I think if I hit this flip option in my align window, yeah, then that's going to spin it around for me. Now, it's kind of in the right position concentrically on that hole. It's just not in the right position depth-wise. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK. And now, in order to get this bolt component really in place, I'm just going to go ahead and click on Modify and then Move, or Move Copy. And now I can take the stainless steel, I'm going to move a component, not a body. That's kind of important. Because this McMaster car component may be made up of several bodies. It may be a threaded section and then a head. So we want to go ahead and move that whole stainless steel component. And now I'm just going to eyeball this. So I'm going to zoom in and just kind of grab my move option and just kind of move it until it snugs up there, and then say OK. So now we've got a bolt component in place there. Did that answer your question?
It did perfectly.
Cool. Alright, so now we've got our slot up here. Were you guys able to get that pin slot moving with me? No? Alright, so let me do that one more time. Let me delete this. Alright, so we can make our pin slot joint the same way we made our revolute joint. So I'm going to click on Assemble, and then As Built Joint here. Now the joint that we're going to be making is a pin slot joint. So we can click on the joint type and then come down to this pin slot option. It's the third from the bottom, fifth from the top. Now the thing that we want to do the moving is going to be our bolt here. So this is our stainless steel carriage bolt up here. So I'm going to choose that as the first object that I click on. And the second object that I click on, the component that it's going to move around, is our vertical arm here. So that's going to be the second component I click on. And now I've got this little this widget, and as I hover my mouse over various things, it's giving me what I'm kind of rotating around and sliding on. And as I notice, if I hover over my bolt, I get a rotation point that's going to be at the right spot. So it's going to rotate around this bolt, right? So if I click on that, then it gives me our little animation. So I'm going to animate it one more time because you can see that it's clearly moving and definitely the wrong way. So I just have to change something. Now it could be that yours is rotating in the wrong way. Maybe in the revolute axis too, if it was rotating like this, like, all right, that's not exactly what we're looking for here. So the rotation axis, I think it was it X? Nope. Was it Z? Sure is. There we go. So now it's rotating in the right way. And I changed this from the x-axis. And it'll probably be the same for you. I guess it could be that these axes will be different depending on how your model is oriented. So it could be that your axes of rotation and slide will be different than my axes of rotation and slide, just depending on how your model is oriented. So what we want is it to be moving up and down and kind of rotating around itself, if that makes sense. And then I'm going to click on OK. Are you following me? Do we have some pin slot joints? I see some thumbs up. Harold, you're with me? Mike, we got a thumbs down? How can I help? I think you might be muted. I'm not hearing you. I see you, but I don't hear you.
I'll watch the YouTube video this week and figure out where I messed up.
Okay, right on. Alright, cool. So, again, feel free to stop me and ask a question. I never mind pausing. Alright, cool. So now we've got a pin slot joint. And that means we've got a third joint, which means we get to do our favorite thing and name stuff. Alright, so I'm going to call this my vertical slide. Sure, even though it's a slide and rotate. And if I can see, ooh, look at this. If I spin down that triangle, I get two things going on here. How much fun is that? Because not only do we have an angle of which we could choose to edit joint limits for, right? I could set a minimum and maximum here. But we don't need to do this because this can spin around as much as it wants all day long. Just spin and spin. But this distance slide here, I think we do want to edit the joint limits on this. And if I set a minimum and a maximum here, so the minimum is kind of going to be where it's at, and the maximum, I can slide this down, and it's just this little blue triangle that I click and slide on here. I can rotate it around to the back side if I want to get real precise with it. You know, this kind of work in Fusion is kind of cosmetic-ish, I guess. However, I do find that sometimes adding a joint if something is going to move, it's helpful to add a joint to it, because sometimes when you're designing things, you don't really think about how it's going to interact with itself when it's moving. So I find it really helpful to have these this editability here, so I can make sure it's not going to be running into itself or colliding with itself. Sometimes you make those kind of weird choices and make a weird mistake. Alright, so now we've got our pin moving up and down, and we've got it limited, so that's super cool. So I'm going to say OK here, and we can move around this joint just the same way we can move around that first joint we made. So I can double click on the joint and then move it up and down, and then I can rotate this axis around here. However, it's not rotating anything except for this bolt. And the reason 0, enter. Alright, cool. So now we need to make two more joints. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to do that same operation. We're going to make our wingnut. Our wingnut is going to be sliding along our upper arm in the same way that our bolt is sliding up and down our vertical arm here. So we're going to do that same pin slot joint again. So I'm going to come up to this assemble menu, come down to this as built joint here. I'm going to click on the component that does the moving. So in this case, the component that is doing the moving is this wingnut here, and the object or the component that is moving in relation to is our actually, is that the way I want to do it? No, that's not right. The way I actually want this arm to be the thing that's doing the moving. In this case, the arm is moving around, so we're going to click on the arm first, and then we're going to click on the wingnut second. And now if I zoom in here, I can click on this end of this bolt here, and it's just so happening that it's giving me the right rotation. So I can click the little play button, and it's moving horizontally the way I want it to, and it's rotating around the spot where I want it to. You guys can see how this is the right way to do it, right? It's not, yeah? Alright. So now, and again, you can change your slide axis if you got to, if yours is looking a little wonky, if yours is going up and down. This one we want to go right and left. Alright, and our z-axis, we could change that. Our rotational axis, we could change that if we wanted to here. So now I can click on OK, and we've got our second pin slot joint here. And I'm going to go ahead and name that as well. So default is pin slot 5, but this is going to be our horizontal slide. And we can edit those joints limits the same way. Again, we can rotate around freely here, so I don't need to add a joint limit to my angle, but I can add a joint limit to my distance. So I can click on that minimum maximum option there and just slide all the way back. Something to note here is, that's close enough, is our arm here, our pin point is what we're calling this, at the end of it, is not moving with this joint when I'm creating this joint here. However, when I say, something interesting happening there. Let me do Command Z here. Let's try that one more time. Distance. Let's make the maximum out here. Okay. So now let's just double click and make sure that this is, oh yep, that's working right. And if it's rotating around a weird spot though. I'm going to do a little experiment here because this is not what I was expecting. So I can move this joint down and I can spin it around. So I'm kind of wondering if we do need to click on this in a different order. So my slot works the way that I want it to on this joint. However, my rotation point is not working how I want it to. So I'm going to try something here. So this horizontal joint, I'm going to right click on it and say Edit Joint. And now this joint, what I'm going to do is try clicking on them in the opposite order that I clicked on them the first time. So I clicked on the arm first and then the wing nut. However, I'm going to try doing it the other way around. So I'm going to click on the wing nut first and then the arm. And then I'll place my little snapping point here. And then everything disappeared. Everything went way down there for some reason. Okay, so let's click cancel. Let's go ahead and just delete this joint. I'm going to delete it. Alright. And let's start from scratch here and see if we can get this right. So I'm making a pin slot joint. The arm here, nope, the wing nut is what I wanted to click on first. And then the arm I wanted to click on second. And I'll zoom in and there we go. Alright, so that's looking better. So now if I say OK, now the wing nut is going to move, but maybe that's fine because our rotation point is going to stay with the wing nut, which is not exactly ideal, but it lets us get the point across. So I guess I'm fine with that. Alright, so I'm going to again edit this name here. So instead of pin slot 6, this is going to be called horizontal slide. And I'm just going to edit my joint limit here and set a maximum. My maximum is going to be out here somewhere, and I'll say OK. And now I'm just going to move that back into place. Got some little dashed lines there, which is kind of weird. Alright, there we go. So I'm just going to move this back. Doesn't want to let me move it back. Maybe I don't want to have a minimum. I want to have a... Let's go ahead and set both. Minimum and a maximum. So... Yeah.
Can I make a suggestion?
Certainly.
You know, I'm
It's not true. It's not true. You're not dumb. All right. So now my joint limit is working here. So I had to kind of mess with my joint limit, and I'm not exactly sure why here. So I've got a minimum of -11 and a maximum of 0. And I guess I'm not sure why this is a negative number. But anyway, so you may have to mess with this, either moving your minimum or moving your maximum. Yeah. Alright, so lastly, I'm going to move my joint back to 0 here. The last kind of joint we want to make is the kind of the default joint what we made when we started. So we've got our bolt that moves up and down on our slot here. We've got our wing nut that moves left and right on our slot here. Now we can attach the wing nut and the bolt together. So if we choose this as built joint option one last time, and this time we are making a rigid joint, which sounds kind of like an oxymoron, because if it's a joint, is it really rigid? Not really, I guess, but the two things, and here it doesn't matter what order we click on them, famous last words, but I'm going to click on my wing nut, and then I'm going to spin around to the other side, and I'm going to click on my bolt. And I mean, I can click play and it just does a little shaky thing here. It just says, hey, this is rigid. I guess that's their sign for rigidity, is like an earthquake. So I'm going to go ahead and click on OK. And now, I suppose I can name that joint, but what I really want to do is show off and show you that I can move this, and now it's going to move that whole arm. It's not just moving the bolt up and down, it's moving that whole arm up and down. And then I can click on this slide here, and I can... Oh, it's not letting me slide you. Why won't you slide? Slide, bro. Oh, because I have to slide the whole mechanism. So this is kind of visually not what I was going for, but it gets the point across. So I wanted to be rotating this arm, but I mean, I guess it lets you, it gets it across in some way, shape, or form. And like this guy here, or actually it's this rotational point, I could rotate this down, and I could still slide along on this axis, which is cool. I can rotate my little point down here. And when you want to set a position, you have to hit the Enter key. So I can rotate my little guy down here, and in theory, all that will move. It sure does. There we go. So those are joints here. Do you guys have any questions about joints before I show you my Dxf file trick?
I'm gonna have to watch this again, man, because the pink slot thing, the first one I had going okay, but on the second one I just completely destroyed it.
Yeah, you know,
it's doing all kind of crazy wonky stuff now.
Yeah, you know, and I had to kind of blow up mine too and click on it in opposite way. So, you know, what I'd encourage you to do is, you know, if you're going to go and give it another try, is when you're making your joint next time around, I had to like delete this thing and make it again. So, but I'll just show you. When you're making it the second time around, I would try, because again, it makes a difference, the order in which you choose your components. So I would, the first time I was making this joint, I was like, alright, I want my arm to move back and forth while my vertical stays stable. And so I chose the arm first and then the wingnut second. That didn't work because it wasn't moving my rotational point. So I had to do the opposite way, where I clicked on the wingnut first and the arm second, and I guess the unfortunate side effect of clicking on it in that order is now when I move this horizontal joint, it moves like my base and everything. So it's not moving the arm, it's moving the base. And you know, I guess this gets at the functionality of it, but visually it's just a little jarring. So you may have to just kind of mess around with that order of where you click on things.
Yeah. And one thing I know for sure I did is I thought I was on one surface and I was on the wrong surface, and that really wonky.
Sure, like that snapping point you're saying. So this yeah, that point which you're snapping to, you know, and I would really utilize this play button. Oh boy. So when you're making a joint, it gives you this little play button there, and you might look at it and go, oh, that's right, but you really got to examine it for a minute and go, all right, yeah, that is indeed moving, rotating in the axis that I want to rotate it in, and it's sliding in the slot that I want to moving along the proper slide axis as well. And again, you can change those just by changing this rotate axis here. When you've got your joint, or you're creating your joint, or you're editing your joint, you can change the axis that it's sliding on, and you can change the axis that it rotates on as well. Alright, so lastly here, before the end of class, I'll show you my little Dxf file creation. So it's really handy to be able to make a Dxf file, because CorelDRAW recognizes a Dxf file as just a hairline line. So it's literally as easy as, once you've opened the file, you just click print. And if you've made a sketch, any sketch, you can export as a Dxf. So this sketch here, I could right click on it and I could say save as a Dxf. And, you know, it would give me my folders here, and I could save it somewhere on my computer. However, that sketch has got all this garbage on it. It's got, It's got all these circles and overlapping lines and dashed lines, and that's going to be a real pain in the butt to clean up after the fact. So my trick is, so for example, this horizontal, you know, and I'm going to keep my main document component, my active component, because I want to be creating sketches inside of this main document component. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a new sketch. So I'm going to go ahead and say create, and then I'm going to say create sketch, and I'm going to start with my lower arm here. So I'm going to hover over this face that is my lower arm, my kind of vertical arm, and I'm going to click on it. And now I've created a sketch on that surface. And now I'm going to use the project command. So I'm going to come up here to the create menu, and I'm going to come down here to project include, and then over to project. The projection filter that I want to use, the selection filter that I want to use, instead of specified entities, so I can hover over, and specified entities will let me choose individual lines and circles. But I want to choose a whole body. So if I change my selection filter to this bodies option, now when I hover over the body that is that arm, it all turns red on the outside, and I can click on that body, and it says I got one selected, and I'll go ahead and say OK. And now you can see all the red lines turned purple. And now if I go ahead and say finish sketch here, I've got a brand new sketch over here, and I can right click on it. I'm just gonna, can I isolate this? I guess not. So now I've got a sketch that is only the lines of the outside of that body. And kind of my go-to is I'll name this my vertical arm laser. So I've got this sketch here now that's a nice, let me turn off all my components just so you can see. Turn off my joints. So now I've just got this one sketch. It's a nice clean sketch without any dotted lines or lines crossing over lines. And now I can right click on that and say save it as a Dxf file. I can stick it on my desktop and give it a name. Arm. Oh, this is the vertical arm. Let's use some proper capitalization there and say save. And now I can just open up that Dxf file directly in CorelDRAW. I can just click on File and Open, and the lines will be black. So that's an important thing to have in CorelDRAW. Like if you don't have black lines, then you got to mess with the color of the lines. The lines will be the appropriate thickness, which is also a thing in CorelDRAW. You need a hairline to cut out on the laser, so this will make hairlines. And now you get a file that's real easy to open up on the laser cutter and cut away. And I can do that same thing for my other arms, or anything else that I want to laser cut, right? So I've got my main document as my active component. I can go ahead and say create a sketch. I'm going to create a sketch on the surface of this arm here that I want to project. And then I'll go ahead and click on my create menu, come down to project include, and choose project. And I've already got body selected. Now I can click on the body here in my drawing view, or over here in my vertical option, I can come down and click on the body. Oops, I'm sorry. This is the horizontal. So in my horizontal component, I can find that body. And even though I'm choosing the body in this horizontal component, because my main document component is the active component, it's making that sketch in the main document component sketches folder. So hopefully that makes sense. So it's appearing in this sketches folder. It's not appearing in a sketches folder down here inside of my horizontal component. And then this too I can just name horizontal arm laser. If you want to be cool, you can spell laser with a Z, or like a couple of Z's. Laser. Alright, cool. So finish sketch. There we go. And then that's one other sketch. I can save it as a DXF. This one is my horizontal arm. Save. And then all I got to do is click open in CorelDRAW and say print. And sharks with laser beams attached to their heads come out and cut up my plastic for me. And it's great. Cool. So next week we're going to start a brand new project. Our project next week I'm kind of excited about. I think we're going to get into generating some machine stuff, some CNC stuff. We haven't done CNC in this class for a while, and I found a project online that I think will make for a nice beginner project. And here, I'll give you a little sneak peek. Have you guys heard of Tippy Tree at all? So you can Google it if you want to. It's like a fun game that this YouTuber made, and hopefully you can still see my camera. I bet you can't really see my camera, can you? I bet I gotta do this. So we're gonna draw parts like this. This is a 3D printed thing, and the object of this game that he makes is like it's a tree-ish game, and then you take these pieces and they get balanced on the tree and hooked on each other. And you know, every person takes a turn, and you have to hook your part on there in whatever way, shape, or form you can find. So I can take my thing and, oop, hey. See, I'd have lost right there. I can hook it underneath. Oop. I'm working out the tolerances, so I'm printing stuff this week. But it's kind of cool, all the ways that you can hold on to a piece. This one is like floating underneath it. It's kind of interesting. You put it off to the side, and then the idea is you kind of pile up your stuff on top of each other. So I'm making a version of Tippy Tree called Tippy Trash. So we're going to make our pieces out of various materials, printed things, or maybe CNC'd wood or CNC'd plastic, so it'll be an excuse to CNC some stuff. And instead of a tree trunk, I made designed a little trash can. So Tippy Trash. And I think the rule will be at the Makerspace, if you play Tippy Trash with somebody, the loser, after it all falls down, has to go find a trash can to empty at the Makerspace. So be a good excuse to get some trash emptied too. So next week, Monday, we'll start a new project. Again, beginner friendly, and we'll draw some parts like this, and then maybe the week after that, we'll get into machining some stuff. And you know, since we're doing these longer format projects, I might talk about feeds and speeds and get into the weeds a little bit there. All right, so until next week, have fun making stuff. Sorry about next week. Yeah. Sorry about the virtual class mic. I know it's nice to have people in person, but between the rain and my car, it didn't work out for me, so I apologize.
Yeah, no problem.
But next week.